Hello and welcome to this annotation video. We're looking at The Man He Killed, which is the sixth poem in the anthology released by OCR, Towards a World Unknown. We're looking just at the conflict section today, and we're going to get straight into this poem, having a quick look at the writer, the poet Thomas Hardy. Many of you might have read a novel by Thomas Hardy. He was a good novelist. He was also a poet as well, so we're going to have a look at this poem, and it's quite an easy poem to work out. It's quite a sort of easy poem to read and to understand, and I think you'll like this one quite a lot. Let's start off with a bit of information about Hardy. So what kind of conflict is going to be in this poem? Well, it's a very anti-war poem. He doesn't come out and say it, but his use of irony and the tone that he uses is clearly anti-war. So that's the first thing we're going to put down. What war in particular was he protesting against? Well, he was very much not a fan of the Second Boer War, which was fought Britain versus South Africa. And I don't think Hardy was a soldier, but he empathised with the South African people and as they tried to defend their homeland against the British. So this is one of his views. He seems to discourage people. He seems to encourage a more personal view of war when considering people rather than just sort of military strategy and political reasoning. He seems to take the side of the people involved in the war itself. What else can we say about Thomas Hardy? Well, the poem was written in 1902. So quite a late one. And yeah, sort of thinking about the fact that he wrote a lot of novels, it seems to kind of take a story kind of style. So you're going to get straight away what is actually going on. The language isn't very complex. His homeland, I believe I'm right in saying, was sort of Dorset area, and he uses some sort of colloquial phrasing, almost to kind of make it sound a bit disarming. It's not supposed to get into your head so much as the other one on this page. There's a certain slant of light. It's supposed to just be a fairly easy to understand poem. Now, you don't have all of this paper, as you can see on the right hand of my screen. All I've done is just slid another piece of paper under here, which you can do just to give me a little bit of extra room to write on. You don't have to, but you know, you're not taking this anthology into the exam, so it's fine to write your extra notes on there. Let's start with a couple of notes on form before we get into the poem. So this is a dramatic monologue. It's the first one that we've done in this series, because actually, if you see here the word he, the voice of the poem is not Hardy himself. He takes on the character of a soldier who is reflecting on a time of conflict. Okay, so we can see straight away it's a dramatic monologue because it's not supposed to be from Hardy's perspective. It's supposed to be from a character, a soldier's perspective. We could also say that this is almost like a ballad as well, because it's in quatrains. It has the sort of the alternate rhyme scheme, and it tells a rather sort of interesting story that we can keep up with. So we could say it's a ballad. I prefer it probably if you refer to it as a dramatic monologue. It's just a little bit more of a technical way of saying, you know, who the voice is, who the speaker is in this poem. Okay, I'm just going to slightly move away from the other annotations. I don't want them to distract you too much. If that's the other poem on this page, there's a certain slant of light that we've already done. So we're going to read it through, and we're going to check that we understand everything there is to know about this poem, including some of the slightly more obscure colloquial references. and then we're going to get into some of the analysis. Okay. Had he and I but met by some old ancient inn, we should have set us down to wet right many a neperkin. But ranged as infantry, and staring face to face, I shot at him, as he at me, and killed him in his place. I shot him dead because he was my foe. Just so. My foe, of course, he was. That's clear enough. Although he thought he'd list, perhaps offhand like, just as I, was out of work, had sold his traps, no other reason why. Yes, quaint and curious war is. You shoot a fellow down, you treat, if met, where any bar is, or help to half a crown. A few references to pick up on them. Nipperkin is just a measure of beer. And he's talking about an inn referring to a pub. He's saying, if I met this person in a different setting, I wouldn't have killed him. It was only because we were face to face in conflict that this has happened. And so obviously this man who he's talking about, the man in the poem, I mean, both men sort of lack identity. They are not identified at all. And that's perhaps symbolic of the fact that they are just sort of pawns in this bigger battle. And it doesn't just have to be referring to the Boer War, it could be referring to any conflict really. But they're just sort of low level, low ranking officers. They don't really have much of an identity. The man, any man, he killed, not given a name. And so he's saying, look, had he and I, the scenario by which we've met has led to this outcome where he has been shot in his place and he's been killed. It's not the fact that I hated him, it's just the fact that it's been in a war and we're both soldiers doing a job and that's it. Ranged, that's just arranged. They're arranged as infantry, army, fighting. They're soldiers and they're staring at each other and he's killed him. Basically, it was a 50-50. It was all on this coin toss. It could have been me that was killed. We both shot and basically he died and I didn't. And maybe he's sort of struggling throughout the poem here. We can add this into the title, I think. Perhaps this soldier is struggling in what we would refer to as survivor's guilt. He was the one that survived this conflict and the other man didn't, so maybe he's suffering guilt in the poem, and that becomes a little bit more emphasised as we go through. Verse 3. I shot him dead because he was my foe. Just so, my foe, of course, he was, that's clear enough, although foe is a rather kind of old-fashioned word for enemy. It doesn't seem to go with the casual, colloquial voice of the poem that we've had in verses 1 and 2. So maybe he has kind of learnt to say this rather than it being his own opinion. We're not sure. He thought he'd enlist. So he hasn't been conscripted to join the army. This is what you do. You enlist when you volunteer. And some of you might, be thinking about doing that after you've studied for a little bit longer. You might be thinking of enlisting in the army, signing up to go and fight, to defend. It's a very brave thing to do. And this man, thought he'd enlist, perhaps, just kind of said in parentheses there, maybe, I might do. It's emphasising the fact that it's a very casual decision. And then he says it again, offhand. It's a casual choice. He hasn't weighed up the options. He hasn't sat and had a big chat with his family as you might do if you were going to enlist in a war. He's just out of work. It's a completely coincidental thing that he can't really control. And so this coincidence leads to this conflict previously mentioned, and that conflict leads to death. And all the way through this poem, I want you to notice there's like a little chain of events happen to bring about this death, almost like it's inevitable. He sold his traps, his sort of trappings and belongings, we would say, so possessions. He'd sold all of his belongings. No other reason why. Yes, quaint and curious war is. Quaint meaning kind of peculiar, funny, strange. How strange war is. And it's a sort of very kind of a very offhand way to say it. It's sort of like underwhelming conclusion that Hardy comes to at the end. This is his conclusion, and it's sort of ironic how underwhelming this conclusion is. You shoot a fellow down, and this is just a coincidence that because you're both fighting on different sides, there's no other reason why, you're just enemies. And if you'd met them in a normal place, going back to the thoughts in verse 1 now, you treat them to a drink. Maybe if they needed a bit of money, you would give them money too. That's the whole story of this poem. So we could have a look at some of the messages here about this poem, and some of these will tie in obviously to the analysis that we're going to do. But I think the inevitable consequences of war is that war is futile. It could have been him, it could have been me that died. In the end it was him, but it could have so easily been me. So he's sort of saying that war is pretty futile. He's also questioning the motivations that people that soldiers have for joining. It's almost like, why would you join? Oh, you're just out of work, you need a job. So it's the motivations that soldiers have, and maybe there's a slight suggestion that they are taken advantage of. Maybe there's that slight suggestion that they're taken advantage of, these two people. They're just sort of out of work, and so therefore they're easily used to go and, here we go, take this gun, go and kill that person now. Why? Oh, because they're your enemy. And that's the sort of message here. And I think probably overall, and I'm going to have to steal a bit of space down here to get this written down. Overall, I think the message seems to be that when war has gone away, so the absence of war brings joy, and perhaps, as he's talking about, he could have just been a friend of mine, we could have been joking and laughing in a bar, companionship. But war actually creates something that is the opposite of these things. It brings sadness and it brings enemies. So the absence of war brings joy and companionship. I think that's a key message to take from this poem as well. Well, let's go through some of the interesting structural and language details in this poem. I'm going to use just the same pink as my language colour and yellow as my structural colour, and I don't want to just think about what the techniques are. I want to try and tie those to the effects as well, and even better if I can tie it to some message that we've just outlined. So I think what's really interesting to start with is this conditional tense that we've got at the start. It reinforces this sort of futility. It could have been so different, but it wasn't. So we've got this conditional tense straight away. I'm going to highlight my techniques to try and keep track of what I'm looking for. I'd like to try and get a balance of language and structure, but no worries if we don't. Had he and I, again, lacking identity, but we've already got that point up there, so I'm not going to write that in again, but met in some old ancient inn, we should have set us down to wet right many a nipperkin. The idea here then that this colloquial language coming right from Hardy's Dorset dialect. So if you've ever been down that part of the world, it's sort of a very rural area, and you can go and visit Thomas Hardy's house. I've never been to it, but I'd like to one day. So it's a colloquial language, again just reinforcing the joy that no war, so anti-war, brings. it's not formal language, it's very cheerful, and the rhyme scheme really helps us with that. Met, wet, in, nipperkin. We've also got a lovely kind of sing-song metre here. Had he and I but met by some old ancient inn, we should have set us down to wet like many a nipperkin. You can almost like do a little clap, a little song, a little dance, trying to join into that song. It's an extremely cheerful tone to start off with. So we've got this really cheerful tone when war is no longer a possibility. Because actually, right at the start, we know that he's still thinking about this man, but this is something that's happened that was in the past. So this whole first stanza is just a hypothetical scenario. It is completely never going to happen because he's already killed this man. And I think that we get this super intentional, we get this really clearly joyful tone to begin with, just to set that scene and then break that tone here. Now he doesn't break that tone by breaking the metre. The metre continues, but Ranger's infantry, and staring face to face, I shot at him and he at me and killed him in his place. It carries on that joyful rhyme scheme, that alternate rhyme scheme. We've got A, B, but it's almost ironic. It leaves a horrible taste in your mouth, okay, because of the way he sort of carries on this cheerful tone, but contrasts with the content of second stanza. And that contrast is extremely important here. It makes you feel uncomfortable. And I tell you what is also making me feel uncomfortable. This monosyllabic and overly simplistic rendering. This is the memory. This is what the whole poem is based on, and look at how simple it is. He doesn't say, my fierce bullets penetrated his paper-like skin and tore it. It's none of this emotive language. It's totally emotionless. It's totally emotionless. This monosyllabic, emotionless tone, making him seem almost like a robot. It's robotic, almost like he's been programmed to do this. And the third stanza really does reinforce that idea as well. He doesn't have a good reason why. And this is the thing that's causing him the guilt. I shot him dead because. And when we get that end of the line word, and then it begins the next line, we've got a special word for that in English, so we want to try and get all these techniques written down because they might be useful to you in your exam. And this is anadiplosis, this Greek term that we can learn here. Now, anadiplosis is just what I said. The end of that line starts the next line, and it doesn't just happen in poetry, it happens in novels and plays and things like that as well, okay? But the anadiplosis creates this chain. The words create the chain, and it's trying that now the man, whoever this soldier is, this guilty soldier, this survivor, is now trying to piece together the piece, maybe the justification for killing the other soldier. He's trying to create this justification for killing the man, whoever this man is, the man he killed. He's trying to piece the pieces together in this puzzle. I shot him dead because, and then he stops, and he has this very deliberate dash here. The dash is making him pause and think, hang on a second, why did I kill him again? Why was it? Oh, I remember, because he was my foe. And again, it sounds like he's been told to say this. It's robotic. it's not his own feelings, it's the fact that he's been drilled for this moment. Go take this gun and kill those people, don't question it, just go and do it. And so Hardy is very critical of that sort of that style of war, or whatever your feelings are about that. That's just something that Hardy is challenging here in this poem. Just so, my foe, of course he was. Nice internal rhyme going on here. Just so, my foe. Again, creating this sort of robotic rhythm. This like robotic sort of response. If you're questioned, this is what you say. This is the consequence of war. Of course he was, that's clear enough. And then we get the first little bit of enjambment in the whole poem. Now, I've seen enjambment spelled two different ways, without the E and with the E. I'm going to spell it with the E because that's the one it was on the dictionary when I checked it. But this enjambment is when you break a sentence across two lines, and here it even happens over two stanzas. All of the stanzas up to now have been end stopped. We've got a exclamation mark finishing stanza 1, we've got a full stop finishing stanza 2, and then as soon as we get this enjambment, it draws attention to the fact that, hang on a second, his argument, his justification for killing this soldier is not watertight. It is not finished. When he kills him in his place, he doesn't stop thinking about it, it drifts. And so the enjambment, the break in metre, reflects his, you could say that the break in metre almost like reflects his broken viewpoint. He is now not just parroting back because he was my foe, just so my foe, of course he was. He's not just parroting back this robotic response that he's been taught. That's clear enough, although now he's going to go on to kind of express some form of guilt and connect somehow with the other soldier's past. And he doesn't know this. This whole stanza here is not what he's been told about the soldier. He just guesses. So he's thinking even deeper now. He's zooming further in into a hypothetical scenario that he's completely created out of his mind. And it seems to be really important to him that he goes through this process, even kind of torturing himself, really. He thought he'd enlist, perhaps offhand like, just as I was out of work, had sold his traps, no other reason why. And I do get this sense of grief and guilt, and I tell you why I get that. I get all of these parentheses coming in here, these dashes, we get like dashes, we sometimes get brackets, but wait, they're called parentheses. And the parentheses in this 4th stanza really do help to reinforce the fact that his viewpoint now has been broken. It's a similar point to up here. It's kind of, he's questioning, and perhaps we could tie this to the emotion. He doesn't ever drift into emotive language, and it's not because Hardy couldn't do that. He absolutely could. He's a very, very prolific writer and a very talented writer, and it wasn't just because he couldn't connect with the emotion of this. I think it's important that this poem is completely drained of emotion, but he seems to be feeling some kind of emotion here as he stutters through these lines. He's stuttering, he's almost stumbling through the made-up hypothetical past that he has imagined for this person. And he keeps referring, he'd enlist, he'd offhand, like just as I, and he's saying, you know, he can imagine that he's just the same as he is. So he's kind of reinforcing their similarity here. We get this final little stanza here, and interestingly I've drawn this circle just so that I wouldn't forget to refer to this. So I'm going to draw it again over here. We've got this circle, Why have I drawn a circle on my work? I haven't just got bored and started to doodle, but the circle is really important. We come back round, first stanza comes back and is revisited in the fourth. We've got a circular structure to the whole poem. Why does he go back to imagining pubs and bars just like he did at the top? He called it an inn, some old ancient inn, and now he just refers to it as a bar. Why does he do that? Well, it could reflect, again, the futility of thinking about these things, the futility maybe of war, that things just repeat. You know, he is likely to go and fight in another war after this one, and will he do the same thing again? Yeah, he will, because that's what he's paid to do, it's his job. He would shoot someone dead and he would still have the same feelings as guilt, because things repeat and things never change. So just like the poem repeats, so the message is that things repeat, people will always kill people, and so this again reinforces the anti-war sentiment in this poem very clearly. So that's my little circle structure marker. I think that's a really important thing when we're referring to this poem. A couple more things to say. Yes, quaint and curious war is. Yes, I think I've come to my logical conclusion. How funny war is. But he seems to be saying all the way through that it's a terrible thing. So why does he have this strange, I don't know, just a really strange sort of understatement almost. There's a special word in English for this. Litotes it's called. And a litotes is when you find that something has been deliberately understated. So he's deliberately understating how bad war is, again, to leave this awful taste in your mouth that as an observer to these things, someone who is not personally connected, we should be feeling more emotional, and yet the litotes, working with the emotionless tone of the poem, drives you to kind of feel like, hang on a second, this isn't right. You shouldn't just be able to shoot someone down where in any other circumstance you'd just lend some money to, or you'd help them and you buy them a drink. So again, Hardy just reinforcing this sort of inevitability to the poem. So that is not everything about this poem, but I hope it's a good start for you to get to grips with what's going on in here. Just a couple of words about tone. We've got this little box down here that I'd like to fill in. There is a clear inevitable tone. The circular structure really reinforces that. Okay, the fact that it just keeps going round and round and it will never change. Tied into that is a tone of futility. Futile. War is futile. But even the conversation that he has with himself about the man he killed is futile, because he's still going to do the same thing again. So it works on two levels, that one. He obviously feels guilt throughout the poem, but there's a deep sense of irony in this poem. Irony is the most clever thing that you can talk about, because nowhere in the poem does it say, oh, and by the way, I'm being ironic here. However, the whole thing seems to be ironic all the way through. So I hope that's been useful. Again, that's nowhere near everything that I wanted to say about this poem, but if you have any comments or questions, please just drop them in the comments box. Thank you.